As we intensify the fight against crime, it is vital that we safeguard the integrity and credibility of the police and other law enforcement agencies. I'm establishing a Judicial Commission of Inquiry that will be chaired by Acting Deputy Chief Justice Mbuyisile Madlanga.
Yes, yet another potentially costly inquiry in our short history as a democratic country. And like the State Capture Commission, the Madlanga inquiry's scope may well be extensive. But as News 24 specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan explains, the president was left with no other choice but to appoint a seasoned justice to probe our police and the country's justice system as we know it.
What's the alternative? Who is going to investigate this? We know, the central allegation is law enforcement is compromised. The NPA is compromised. The Metro Police are compromised. The judiciary potentially is compromised. Magistrates, judges, etc. No one's named. So, getting someone who is at the apex court, a retired deputy chief justice with an exemplary reputation in a public process is really the only way that you're going to assure the public that, we're actually doing what we can to get to the bottom of this.
Later in the show, the president's executive consents to lifestyle audits, and finally, 2 Kalahari lions make the Eastern Cape their new home.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
Stay tuned until the very end of the show to hear your latest voice notes. And if you'd like to engage us on this episode's topics, you can send us your thoughts and opinions to the official Lead WhatsApp line. That number 072 562 3179. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. Mbuyisile Madlanga, you'll want to remember the name of our current acting Deputy Chief Justice, as the soon-to-be retiring Justice will now be chairing the country's umpteenth Commission of Inquiry, this time broadly looking into alleged criminal and political interference in the South African Police Service. This following the KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkonazi's startling claims that the heart of the SAPS has been captured by criminals, allegedly including controversial tender don Vusi Musi Kat Matlala. But the inquiry's scope will be broader than just the SAPS. It'll hone in on the National Prosecuting Authority, the State Security Ministry, the Judiciary, and even certain Metro Police departments. Buckle up, the next few months leading into an election year are about to become even more interesting politically. Joining me now from our Johannesburg studios, now to react to the President's Sunday address, is specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan. Karyn, thanks so much for your time. Welcome back to The Lead.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start with whom the President's appointed to chair the inquiry's team, Karyn. Who is acting Deputy Chief Justice Madlanga? I understand that he was an evidence leader at the Madlanga Commission, for example, right?
This was a man who was actually shortlisted for the Chief Justice vacancy. He was interviewed at length. He is widely regarded as one of the best jurists in the Constitutional Court. And, he gave quite a far-reaching ruling in regard to the Judicial Service Commission and the need to not have, private deliberations kept private or confidential when decisions by the JSC were challenged. So he's not someone who believes that the judiciary should itself be prevented from, facing interrogation around its own decision making. The fact that he was shortlisted for that position gives you a sense of the kind of level of support he has. And there's a huge amount of former Constitutional Court clerks, for example, who are very, very happy about the fact that he has been put in this position because of the work ethic he has, his exemplary reputation for integrity, and his proven, leadership qualities in the judiciary. He has been serving as the acting Deputy Chief Justice and Chief Justice for some time now.
Going to be assisted by Advocate Sesi Baloyi as well as Advocate Sandile Kumalo. Any notes from you, Karyn, on these two particular individuals?
I know Advocate Sesi Baloyi. She, of course, is one of the commissioners at the JSC. I have, many times encountered her in terms of media queries. She's got, a very, very good reputation. I've always found her to be very professional, very upfront, very honest. And I think that, I think both of them are excellent choices for this very important role that they play in terms of directing how this process unfolds itself. This is quite different from the Zondo inquiry in that Zondo was pretty much on his own with evidence leaders. Now he has these two advocates. Madlanga has these two advocates assisting him, but simultaneously with also those central powers that the Commission of Inquiry has, and that's to subpoena evidence and to call for witnesses, to summons witnesses. So, they're coming into this situation with all the powers that Zondo had, but with the assistance of two legal professionals at the same time.
Sure. Quite a powerhouse team. Of course, we're now calling it from today the Madlanga Commission, the scope of which already set out by the president in the Sunday address is quite large. I mean, a lot of people have still sort of focused on the Mkonazi allegations, and for good measure, that's the entry point into what all of this is. But this is going to be looking into all broader spheres of criminal justice in this country as we understand it. It's going to include the judiciary, even certain metro police departments. And in the past, we've had some commissions of inquiry looking into policing, notable of which, of course, I've already mentioned the Madlanga Commission and the O'Regan Commission looking into alleged police inefficiencies within Khayelitsha. Here we've got something that's a lot broader, right?
And this is what's going to be interesting, because it's going to be about the terms of reference that the president gives to this inquiry, like how he outlines what they need to be investigated. One of the great criticisms of the Zondo inquiry, which I felt was unfair, was that essentially, it ballooned into this behemoth that it, was 3-4 year long investigation into pretty much every aspect of corruption at any time. But that was because of the far-ranging terms of reference that the then President Jacob Zuma gave to it, that he essentially, an argument could be made, almost wanted the commission to be completely snow-blinded by all the kind of corruption that it was uncovering. And as a consequence of that, of course, one of the things that it had initially looked into but didn't go further with was this issue of law enforcement, was this issue of politicized prosecutions. They did examine the SSA, but they didn't do a kind of far-reaching investigation as, into law enforcement itself. And what I think we also need to remember here, Graham, is because of the timeline that we're talking about, the fact that the Political Killings Task Team came into effect in 2018, this inquiry is effectively going to be putting law enforcement under the Cyril Ramaphosa administration on trial. So this is the second chapter of state capture inquiry. But this time, it's not Jacob Zuma. It's about Ramaphosa's leadership ultimately, but it's also about the law enforcement that came after the so-called state capture that occurred in law enforcement under Zuma. And that's why, this is actually going to have very far-reaching implications for the political fortunes of the ANC.
Absolutely. And as it stands this morning, as we sort of digest and stomach what the president's now offered on this table for us, opposition parties, of course, knee-jerk reactions. They're fuming at the moment. They're saying another potentially R1 billion that got footed for the Zondo Commission. The taxpayers are going to bear the brunt of yet another commission of inquiry in South Africa's longest history of commission of inquiries. But on the other side of the coin is, what else would the president have done in this circumstance, right? And that's where I sort of agree with you, is that, a commission was always going to be in the offing here.
Well, what's the alternative? Who is going to investigate this? We know, the essential allegation is law enforcement is compromised. The NPA is compromised. The Metro Police are compromised. The judiciary potentially is compromised. Magistrates, judges, etc. No one's named. So, getting someone who is at the apex court, a retired chief justice, a deputy chief justice with an exemplary reputation in a public process is really the only way that you're going to assure the public that, we're actually doing what we can to get to the bottom of this. But what's going to be interesting for me, Graham, of course, is that this is a country investigating allegations of wide-ranging corruption throughout law enforcement and the politically powerful in real time. So there are investigations, criminal investigations that are, and our colleague Jeff Wicks and yourself have done exemplary work. And I would urge people to go and listen to those podcasts, about the Mkhwanazi revelations and Cap Matlala and all of this. But, there are criminal prosecutions unfolding in real time simultaneously. And I think one of the big battles that we in the media and civil society is potentially going to have is a potential argument that says, well, some of this stuff needs to be behind closed doors because it could have real implications for criminal justice matters, crime intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, we in the media need to be ready for that fight for access in relation to those kind of arguments.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, Police Minister Senzo Mchunu is now agreed, he's welcomed, if you will, the direction from the president to go on a forced leave of absence. It leaves his ministry to somebody to take up on an acting position. Here enters Professor Feroz Kachalia from Wits University. He's also retiring there, so you would be able to take on this position in a more full-time role, albeit in an acting position. What do we know about Feroz? He's a former community safety MEC as well.
I mean, there were a lot of welcoming, responses to his appointment. I think it's very interesting that the president chose to go outside of his cabinet into academia to appoint someone to what is actually a very, very pivotal ministry, the
100%,
police.
100%.
And, he could have had the options to, and they've been very reluctant to do that, but potentially give it to a DA minister, which I think they would have, I think there was a sense of alarm about that. But there have been him as a character has been welcomed. But of course, there has been this simultaneous allegation that in going outside of the cabinet or outside of parliament to appoint this person, he may have potentially violated the constitution. So I expect we are going to see litigation in that regard. The president has made it clear that he regards this as a legal decision. But I would love to know the kind of back thinking and the to and fro that informed this, because I think it's telling that, no one wanted to take up what potentially could be a poison chalice, or there was a reluctance around getting a minister from the DA, or, the other ministers were literally like, let's just get someone completely outside of the situation who cannot possibly be imputed to have been tarnished by any of this to try and steer what is clearly a very, very shaky ship at this point.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graham Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072-562-3179.
Well, it was never going to be former Minister Bheki Cele, Karyn, because of the allegations stirring at the moment. And he's admitted to staying twice, according to Jeff Wicks, our investigative journalist, staying twice in the Capital Main in Menlyn, a very swanky apartment pad that was leased at the time by Vusi Musi Kat Matlala. Bheki Cele has admitted to staying there twice, but he says he doesn't have any sort of business. He claims he doesn't have any business interests or knows Vusi Musi very well. Anyway, as a side note,
also, remember, he had that whole scandal around the police lease deal.
Of course,
and the findings that were made against him, and then there was an inquiry, and then that he challenged it, and no one defended his attempts to challenge it. So he was able to override it. He is the ultimate Teflon man when it comes to political survival. But I don't think, I think that his name, when this investigation unfolds, is going to be very much at the center of some of these accusations.
Absolutely. Back to Prof. Kachalia. As I understand it, he's previously helped to author a report that was essentially put together by the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, which had already looked into policing matters and state security before. And I think that was following the July riots, the notorious July riots, as I understand it. What do we know about that particular report and its findings? We can't go obviously into too much detail there, but about the recommendations and enacting those recommendations. Do we know if the Ramaphosa administration has fared well in that regard at all?
I think what the July unrest exposed quite profoundly was just a complete lack of preparedness on the part of the intelligence services and on the part of the police to deal with violent unrest. That they had all the timelines. They knew when Jacob Zuma was going to have to hand himself in, but there was a complete lack of preparedness to deal with the aftermath of that. And our colleague Kavil Singh, Jeff Wicks, and our former colleague Juanita Hunter wrote about that in 8 days in July.
Yeah.
And I think that, it really exposes what I think, Jeff Wicks has also referenced is this factional nature of policing, that, there's different aspects and dimensions of service according to which particular faction happens to be in a powerful position at that particular time. And I think that, there is a profound need for a completely depoliticized law enforcement environment. And that goes for every aspect of this. And I think that there's a lot of critique around some of the decisions that have been made in respect of policing, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, which is really one of the most violent provinces in our country. From the days of apartheid, where there was factionalized violence, very much taken advantage of by the apartheid state, to now, where we see this absolutely horrific level of political killings, which was actually what sparked the political killings task team in the first place. There's a real sense of KZN as the Wild West of South Africa, and a sense of lawlessness and an apparent inability to deal with that in an effective way, which has seen itself manifesting in different situations. We remember the Cato Manor police unit scandal. Ultimately, all those police officers, the case against them collapsed, but there were revelations there essentially of shoot to kill strategies being employed against taxi bosses, etc. Of course, people like Johan Boysen being implicated, fundamentally saying that was a political investigation. And also, of course, in the NPA era, someone like Shadrach Sabir, who is now in the heart of this current scandal, was accused alongside Anwar Dramat of the unlawful rendition of Zimbabweans as part of a politicized prosecution. So our law enforcement has always been politicized, and it's been politicized to the detriment of ordinary South Africans. And I'm hoping, and I think all of us are, that this inquiry will expose that and come up with proper practical solutions to stop it.
And just in general, it's quite interesting that the Metro Police, more than ever before, is going to be closely looked at here as well, and the abuse thereof in certain circumstances across the country. I thought that interesting as well in itself. Moving ahead, when do you think this inquiry could begin, Karyn?
Sure.
When do you think it'll probably be held in Gauteng, right?
Definitely, it's going to have to be as soon as possible. I mean, it very much resembles the kind of inquiry that happened with SARS, where there was also an interim report. And if I remember correctly, Ramaphosa used that as a basis to fire Tom Moyane off the back of the interim report. So I think that 3-month report is going to very much be utilized potentially to make a decision about Mkunu's future. And then, of course, they produce, I think they said, a final report or a second report at the 6-month mark. But I think they're trying to very much have a defined period in order to deal with what potentially is an all-engulfing scandal. And I think the thing to stress here is that, previous inquiries that we've had, Zondo was very much off the back of the Gupta leaks, off the back of Thuli Madonsela's report, etc. But this is really the first time in South African history that we've seen someone in the upper echelons of law enforcement who is still in that position come out and say, this is the alleged rot. It goes all the way to the minister. It goes all the way to potentially the judiciary, law enforcement, et cetera. And someone who's on the inside of things saying we have a problem. And so I think, you can see by the level of haste from Cyril Ramaphosa, who is not someone, Graham, known for his hastiness in addressing this, gives you an indication that there is a real sense of a kind of potential national emergency around this particular issue.
A bit disappointing that he didn't open take the opportunity to open all of this up for media's questions. It is concerning that we as the media administration. We're not getting an opportunity to question the president. And I think there's been a lot of commentating around that.
And it's unfortunate because, I remember during the Zuma administration that you would be able to ask questions. We do get the opportunity in sort of limited doorstop type scenarios where you get to ask one or two questions, but it's not a press conference scenario, and it doesn't enable journalists to really push for further detail, such as what you've just asked. When is this happening? When is this getting underway?
What's
like
the budget? What's the budget?
What's the budget? Like, who's going to, like ultimately be responsible for implementing, the outcomes of this, given that when you spent R1 billion on the Zondo inquiry, you did little to nothing to implement what its recommendations were, even when it actually blatantly, suggested to you that you should fire certain ministers, and you didn't do that. So what guarantees are you giving to the South African public that you're actually going to do something when this report finally comes out?
Karyn, all the while, the main person, as you say, who's blown the whistle on all of this, Lieutenant General Mkhonazi, there's been some sort of commentating on the sidelines of people saying, could he be squaring up for a future political sort of position in all of this? That has been something that people have been talking about, and he seems to be getting, a significant popular following off the back of these very explosive allegations.
Well, as we are doing this interview, members of the MK party are demonstrating in support of him.
Sure.
So,
in KwaZulu-Natal, which is where they got, 44% of the vote?
I think that there is something for us, a crime-riddled society such as our own, where our defense to white genocide mythology is to say, well, everyone gets murdered here, is that when we see a figure who's going, there's a serious problem here, and, this is kind of a deliberate political project to undermine law enforcement when it's effective, that is going to have resonance, because there is a level of frustration and anger.
Definitely.
But amidst all that emotional reality, which is grounded on the horror of each and every South African who's had a bad and possibly, fatal experience with crime, we do need to have reticence to say, well, what is the evidence? Where, because the political killings task team has itself come under a huge amount of fire. They were involved in that Fortier case. They arrested those two lawyers who'd exposed Oscar Maboyane's alleged fake qualification. Someone like Mary de Haas, for example, who has been extremely critical of them. So we cannot make the mistake that in our deep need for a hero, that we make a hero out of someone who may prove to disappoint us. I think the main point now is to have the inquiry, for the evidence to come out into the open, and for a learned judicial officer such as the Deputy Chief Justice Madlanga to make an evaluation on all of this that gives South Africans a sense of what is actually going on here. And that's all we can hope for at this point.
Yeah, I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a very, very long commission. I don't think it's going to be an overnight thing. There's just too much to get into here. There's so many sectors of the criminal justice system in this country, the judiciary, everything that's going to be looked at. And it could even be broadened further. Who knows? Yeah, Karyn, I really do appreciate it. I know that we're going to be, you especially are going to be spending a lot more time looking closely at the scope of the commission's work, what it entails, what the budget looks like, and when the venue gets announced. And I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon.
Graham, what I will say, and I will die on this hill, is that I think this inquiry may be the beginning of the end for the ANC. Because I think after the state capture inquiry, their votes plummeted to 40%. That was the political outcome of us knowing that, as the Deputy Chief Justice then said, that the ANC was effectively an organized criminal enterprise. Now we're putting the Ramaphosa administration's law enforcement environment on trial. And if any of these allegations in fact prove to be true, I think it's going to be a bridge too far for ordinary South Africans in terms of ongoing support of the ANC. And
that sliding scale of electoral victory for the African National Congress in more recent elections will continue to slide further down. It's going to be interesting, especially as we move into very critical local government elections next year. Karyn, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it here on The Lead.
Thank you.
To our trending topic now, and every member of President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet and the executive at large, including his deputy Paul Mashatile, has consented to lifestyle audits for the 2024-25 financial year. It's a 2018 Tumamina pledge by the president that was only first carried out last year, but even then, the findings were never disclosed to the public. As News 24's parliamentary correspondent Jan Gerber reports, this is a process carried out directly by senior members of the presidency itself. A full lifestyle audit, as it's understood, is also preceded by lifestyle reviews and investigations, different cogs in the audit process, if you will. Answering a parliamentary question put forward by the opposition Rise Mzansi party, Ramaphosa indicated that publicizing the findings, though, comes with a legal framework limitation, which is currently, quote-unquote, under consideration. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a very special announcement. The News 24 podcast offerings are about to be bolstered by a new addition to the family. Please welcome fellow broadcaster Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, I'm Bruce Whitfield, and I'm super excited to announce the fact that I'm teaming up with the fabulous people at News 24, and we're going to produce together a podcast called Bruce Whitfield's Business Week. Everything you need to know about the world of business and money and high finance and policy and the things that affect your back pocket every Thursday at 5 o'clock. Bruce Whitfield's Business Week is business without any of the boring bits. Subscribe now.
And finally, from the Kalahari to the Eastern Cape Escarpment, the Addo Elephant National Park has 2 new residents. And no, they don't have long trunks. They're a pair of male lions from the Kalahari National Park. South African National Park says the duo, both age 7, are climatizing well after spending a couple of weeks in a boma in Addo. They follow 2 lionesses, also from the Kalahari, who arrived in March already. There are now in total about a dozen lions or so in Addo, with the latest pair collared for rangers' research purposes to see if they live up to expectations and increase the local population. They've replaced 2 older Addo lions, dubbed Witwarm and Niklas, who've since been shifted to Cradock's Mountain Zebra National Park. Well, what would you name the 2 new residents? And please don't say Simba. Drop us a voice note, 072 562 3179.
Listen Up is News 24's sharp new podcast, where hosts Tim Cohen and Mark Barnes cut through the clutter with bold takes and unfiltered insight.
They're not fighting for the good of South Africa. And so this is degenerated into a series of tit-for-tat spats. How's that for a bit of poetry early in the morning?
Smart, punchy, and unapologetically real.
President Ramaphosa has explained why he did it, and the reason he did it was because he said that people weren't allowed to go to America, and then Andrew Whitfield did, and then there's a dispute about whether or not he asked.
Catch new episodes of Listen Up every Tuesday on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
I know a lot about this. Not really.
Yeah,
but
there we go.
Here goes.
You could be the accused for a change. Yeah.
From lion relocations to police inquiries, can you believe we're already in the middle of July 2025? Thanks so much for your voice notes on our previous edition on Thursday. Why is Gauteng's 703 million rand forensic super lab still closed? This state-of-the-art facility, speaking to our journalist there, Alex Patrick, is meant to be speeding up the processing of postmortems in Gauteng, but it's been closed for some time now. It's said to be around 98% complete, but the building contractors are refusing to lift another finger until they paid the final costs that they claim they're owed by government. We got these voice notes in.
Yeah, the lead. You can think by yourself, why is that lab still closed for 700 million? Because of corruption. The whole system of the police, forensics, NPA, what you call, they are corrupt. Even correctional service, traffics, all these instances is corrupt. That's why that place is still closed. Why they build it? That money they can use for other things, but now it's still closed because of corruption.
The reality of the matter is, as long as we've got money in South Africa, you won't be prosecuted. There are a lot of people, thousands and thousands of people are sitting in jails for years. It's because they don't have money. If you've got money in South Africa, you can get away with anything.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your input there. Please keep them coming for today's edition. Do you think setting up yet another commission of inquiry will do this country any good? Let us know on our official The Lead WhatsApp line. That number's 072-562-3179. We do appreciate all your input there. We've got 3 more episodes this week coming up. Hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels to be notified when those editions drop like clockwork, 7 p.m. Monday to Thursday. My name's Karyn Maughan, and so long as there's news, we'll have The Lead.